Viewers, like you, were very vocal in my last video on what they wanted to see in Canon's next major firmware update for the R5 Mark II as well as the R1. I grabbed the most requested updates for this video. Which enhancements and fixes were deemed the most important? Well, I'll answer these questions throughout this video, but first, I have a rather simple yet humble request. Please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, it helps this channel grow, and most importantly, it keeps you informed on the latest camera gear. Canon Rumors once again teased us about a big firmware update, or as they put it, a major firmware update coming out for the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the EOS R1. What we've been told is that Canon will announce a major new firmware update for both the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1. And I covered that story last week, talking about the major firmware update and what we can expect to see. I also invited you to provide feedback, to provide comments on what you would like to see, well, in that major firmware update. And I received a lot of comments, and I mean a lot. And it gave me an idea. Instead of going through all the comments and addressing them one by one, I thought, why don't I take the most requested updates and create a video about them? So that's what I did. I summed them all up. So let's get right to the first request. Anton said that he would like to see zebras on stills directly in the viewfinder instead of after the picture's taken. And while this is normally a video feature, surprisingly, a lot of photographers have said, you know what, we would like to see this in our cameras. And not just as comments for this video, I've seen it many times in the past, although it's not the most requested update. Matt Ramsey said he liked the suggestions I made in that previous video, but he wanted to see an improved version of pixel shift in the R5. And you know what? Matt wasn't the only person to bring up pixel shift. John gave me a +1 on returning to pixel shift, ideally making it hand-holdable. Also, he suggests here's an easy one that they've never implemented. Allow IBIS to be controlled independently of the lens. I really do hope that Canon brings pixel shift back. The AI upscaled feature that the R5 Mark II has, where's the camera? I have it right here. I've never used it. I've seen enough of it to realize that it's, well, it's an AI processed image. It's not what I shot. What I'd really like to be able to do is to use this handheld or on a stabilizer, but to be able to take into account moving subjects. I think that's a really big deal. Otherwise, you are limited to, well, as I said, food and product photography, where nothing is moving, the camera isn't moving, the food, the product isn't moving. I think Sony in the A705 has done it best. But speaking of photography, and I guess this relates to videography as well, our next request, yeah, I think it's a big deal as well, especially in the R5 Mark II, let alone the R1. The original Greg says, we need a better way of setting the custom white balance. The current method is absolutely inexcusable at this point. And I would say with a camera at this price point, I tend to agree with them. Let me point the camera at something, hit a button, and take a custom white balance reading. Needing to switch to photo mode to take a photo, go to the menu and select that photo, then switch the white balance over to custom is just too many steps. I don't see why there can't be an option when switching to custom white balance to capture and apply the reading. AI, or artificial intelligence, is starting to play a much bigger role in newer cameras, such as the R5 Mark II. And while I see the AI upscaling as no more than a gimmick, when it comes to other fully baked features, such as automatically setting the white balance, well, it's come a long way. For example, Final Cut Pro, and I think it was 10.8, introduced a feature where it would look at a photo or a video, and you could tell it to automatically not just do a white balance, but look at the image and fix it, essentially fix it. And there are scenes where you don't have any gray, you don't have any white, taking a picture of an ocean or an island that's surrounded by water. It does a pretty good job. Now, it doesn't always get it correct. Sometimes I look at it and go like, yeah, that didn't work, but there's other times where I'm pretty impressed. So to be able to add a feature to this camera in a firmware update that does a better job of doing the white balance, yeah, I think we need to do that. I mean, as I'm constantly grading with Final Cut, I'm doing the same things over and over again. And I think, you know, if an AI was able to look at everything I did over and over, I'm sure they could do a much better job of it and then be able to put that logic into an update. For the R5 Mark II and the R1, well, yeah, a big vote there. So a lot of people were very interested in that. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below and if you want to see that. I think what I'm going to do after this video is published, I'm going to take a look at the most requested updates in this video, and then I'm going to put out a poll. Now, unfortunately, the poll limits me to 5 different options, but I think it's helpful to Canon, letting them know based on how we use our cameras, what we would like to see in a firmware update. And who knows? I think they're going to listen. I know they do watch this channel. Hi, guys. So if this feedback gets to them, it's our way, because a lot of us are watching this video, a lot of us are commenting. It provides them a little bit of feedback. And speaking of changes to our cameras, Bill Martin has a simple want. Give me the ability to program the R1 button or the R5 II to toggle pre-shoot on and off. And Bill, well, he speaks for a lot of us. A lot of us have been asking for that capability with pre-shooting, and not just to be able to assign it to a button and to change the length of time, but to be able to take an awful lot of other capabilities within the camera and assign it to a button, and to assign it to buttons that, well, previously don't allow us to assign things to, such as the rate button or even, well, God forbid, the menu button. And then, of course, in case we screw things up, having the option to reset that button back to its original setting. I think that goes a long way, and I think Bill's dead on here with something a lot of us have been asking for a long time, not just for the pre-shooting, but for a lot of other things. And that pre-shooting buffer, there are times where I don't want to have half a dozen images for just holding it down for a fraction of a second, and half a dozen quite, well, after a day of shooting, can turn into 8,000 to 10,000 images. So Bill, I'm for you on this one. I think this one's really high up on the priority list. I just hope Canon's listening and it's high up on their priority list. But talking about high priorities, Bill has another suggestion, another request, which is high on many other people's lists. So, well, Bill, cue it up. The R5 II noise problem isn't just for people shooting with big lenses. I used the R5 II for editorial photography last fall, and for anything just before 9 a.m. on clear days, every R5 II image had to be run through denoise software for it to be usable. And, well, it worked, but it added another step and a lot more time to a full shoot. And this wasn't true for the original R5, and it's not true for the R1. I also don't understand why this is happening. You see, once you go to a backside illuminated sensor, and a stacked sensor always has that backside illuminated, what you're essentially doing, if we take a look at the sensor itself, each photosite used to have circuitry on the top of it, and backside illuminated means you take that circuitry and you put it to the bottom of the photosite. So what does that do? Well, that clears up more space on top of the photosite to make the well a little bit deeper. So when you're capturing those photons and turning them into electrons into the well, you've got more information, which means more light, which means less noise. So for the R5 II to go to a stacked sensor and produce more noise instead of less with the R5 Mark II when shooting with high ISO, well, I don't understand that. Now, could it be the frequency that it's using? Could it be the speed? I don't know. But I do know the whole point of going to a stacked sensor is not just for faster throughput, it's also to be able to, well, capture more light. And that doesn't seem to be happening here. So I do get a sense that this is something that could be fixed in a firmware update. And it's high on a lot of people's lists. I even had people said, look, you know, the one reason why I haven't bought the R5 Mark II is the noise levels in high ISO. And there are a lot of people like Bill that are shooting before 9 a.m. and, well, after 6 p.m. when you're dealing with dawn and dusk. And that is a bit of a challenge, especially for wildlife photographers, because guess what? Dawn and dusk is where a lot of the action happens, and that's where you have to shoot. So having a sensor that produces less noise at high ISO, well, that's a pretty big deal and high on the list of a lot of people for some sort of improvement, enhancement in a big firmware update. Now Berg, on the other hand, gave us a long list of requests, some of which we've already covered, such as pre-capture being mapped to a button and pixel shift, although he does adding it to RAW files, and AI upscale also to RAW files. Noise reduction AI with RAW files. You get the hint here. But the number one is 4K 60 oversampled. And yeah, for video shooters, this one's high up on the list. It's in the top 5. Let's take a look at the R5 Mark II. It's right here. Now, Canon says, right out of the box, with firmware 1.0.0, this can deliver 8K up to 60 frames per second RAW. That's a lot of data. That's pretty impressive. So, if you're going to do 4K oversampled, which is you take that and you downsample it in camera, so you've got better detail, but without a lot of noise, well, it can do 8K oversample 60, so that means it can do physically inside 4K oversample 60. So why hasn't Canon enabled it? Well, I don't know, but one thing I do know is that it would generate more heat, more data, which means more heat. So maybe the amount of time we were able to record 4K 60 oversampled or 4K fine 60, well, maybe it wasn't good enough that Canon decided not to put it in there. But I say, put it in there, even if we only get 8 minutes, and let us know that you can only expect to get 8 minutes at a certain room temperature, and here you go. And even don't even put a limit on it, just let us know, and we've got all the settings, and we can even put the battery grip on the cooling one. But yeah, I agree. I think 4K 60 should be on there. And going back to pre-capture, well, we have a request from Bo4s, and this is for a variable pre-burst. And Berg did touch on this too with customizable timing for pre-capture in his number 6 request. So this one does come very high up. And Jeff also echoed this request, but added a request for pixel shift, not only to be added, but to output in RAW, as did Berg. Are you seeing the trend here? Some capabilities keep coming up over and over again, and I get it. The request for pixel shift, I was surprised at how many people wanted to see this back. I was happy to see it in the Mark I, and I agreed it needed a lot of refinement. But the Sony a7R5 showed us that pixel shift, if done right, can do a fantastic job. So Canon, bring it back to us and give us the option of RAW, and also take into account, well, moving subjects. And I think you're going to have a hit here. I mean, you're not going to let Sony get away with putting this in their camera. Come on. Sony, do you really see them as a camera company? I know you see yourself as the innovator in the marketplace and Nikon as a close second, but you see Sony as a bit of an upstart, right? So let's go ahead and implement a version of pixel shift in the R5 Mark II and the R1 that's even better what Sony has to do. And Sony, keep working on the R5 Mark II, the R5 Mark II, the A7 R5 with the pixel shift, because what you did there is fantastic and it's irritating Canon, so keep doing that. All right, now let's turn to our next request, and you're going to see, again, a bit of a trend here. Oversampled 4K or 4K fine would be the most important update to me. And of course, I agree this was one of the most requested updates, but the next one, well, that was requested even more, and I would say even higher than 4K fine 60. And that's for OpenGate. Metal Saber said that's my number 1 request. I've been wondering why it wasn't an option, as you mentioned, since the sensor's capable. The only other option might be as a 6K shooting mode with a higher frame rate. You know, 4 years ago, we didn't hear much about OpenGate. No one was asking for it, but the one thing that Panasonic has done very well is, well, innovate for video shooters. Time after time when Panasonic releases cameras, everyone thinks, wow, that's pretty impressive. I wish my camera had that. Waveforms, vector scopes, log profiles, frequent firmware updates that provide enhanced capabilities. All these things started with Lumix. And I know lately they've been a bit slow to the marketplace, but they do have a phase detect autofocus system, and they do have OpenGate. I mean, OpenGate allows you to capture the entire sensor, and then you can choose where you want to crop, because you are going to crop. If you're shooting video, which UHD is a standard, I think 16 by 9 or 16 by 10, well, what happens is you clip off the top. You have to. And by doing that, you're making a decision as the camera instead of you as the creative saying, you know what, that video looks good, but I wish I could just, I didn't crop it right. And I think for a lot of people, and for archival purposes, being able to capture the entire sensor, well, it is a big deal. But the next request for photographers has to be right at the top of the charts. Dan Betty, the man with two names, said that the reason why he hasn't purchased the R5 Mark II to replace the two Mark Is, dynamic range for sure. Equally as important for me is the ability to switch to video mode using the MFM button in my right hand because, well, I'm a wildlife photographer and I'm often shooting with the 600mm f4. Switching between stills and 3 video modes is important to me. I could no longer do that with my R6 Mark II, and for that reason, sold it after a couple of weeks, despite an improved autofocus system, which is why I bought it in the first place as a complement to my R5s. If they fix these two things, I'll be buying the R5 Mark II. Again, we see that trend. We want to have better dynamic range, and well, and this is interesting. So I want to talk about this for, just give me a minute, and then we'll get on to the next point. When it comes to dynamic range with the R5 Mark II, I keep singing its praises for video work. Because with Canon Log 2 as well as waveforms, I'm able to get incredible dynamic range even shooting on freshly fallen snow. The colors of my subjects still just are perfect. They're exposed properly. And yet the footprints in the snow also exposed properly. And when I've got a scene where it's sunny and you've got the leaves changing, you've got the sun in the background and it's rather dark in the foreground, it still, again, produces incredible results. I'm really happy with the dynamic range in video. But when it comes to stills, especially for wildlife photographers, as Dan Betty is, well, yeah, the dynamic range isn't as good. And yes, it does depend on whether you're using electronic or mechanical a little bit. There's no denying that, especially when shooting high ISO, the dynamic range is off. So hopefully that's fixed. All right, on to our next request. I don't know if I'm the only one still getting overexposed EVF from time to time. I had it happen this weekend with my 200 to 800mm, and there's nothing to do. It kind of freezes. I hope they will fix this in time. Yeah, this is something that happens to me from time to time as well, but it's kind of like having Windows. Doing a daily reboot just seems to be, well, kind of normal. I've got an issue, do a reboot, and it goes away. Well, same thing with the EVF. I'll be shooting, and all of a sudden, the exposure changes, and I'm thinking, okay, I've made a change to some of my settings. And I look at the video afterwards, and there was no change. So it's kind of, I think the EVF is a little bit schizophrenic. There's something in the code there where it's reading something, and then all of a sudden it's completely changing it. And there is something else I'd like to add as well. For those of us shooting with Canon Log 2, we have a bit of a problem with the EVF looking overexposed. If you don't shoot video, let me just explain. What Canon Log does is really protects the shadows and the highlights. And to get the best results, what you want to do is you want to completely overexpose your footage to the point where it's almost about to clip and isn't clipping. Now, the point where you do want to clip is, let's say you're shooting a scene, an airport or a building or something inside. The actual street lights or the headlights or the lights themselves, it's fine if they're overexposed and you can bring everything up, and then in post you bring things back down again and everything looks okay. But in the EVF, as you overexpose, guess what happens? You can't read any detail in the highlights and it does look overexposed. You just have to trust your experience knowing that with the waveforms in Canon Log 2 that things aren't overexposed to the point where they look terrible. And they really do. It's when I first started shooting, I realized I got the footage back and I'm like, there's a lot of noise here. This is not what I thought. And then I remembered, oh yes, Canon Log 2, raise it up as much as you can before it clips for everything. And you know what? Great results. Bob Drummond said that for the R1, we desperately need a waveform monitor and compressed non-RAW 6K. Doesn't seem to be any reason not to add these, as the R5 II has them, and it's cheaper and less powerful than the R1. Yeah, I gotta admit, I'm a little bit surprised by this as well. Now, obviously, the R5 II isn't going to have 6K because its sensor is, well, 8K, and 6K on the R1 because of its resolution of 24 megapixels. But to not have a waveform monitor on the R1, I'm honestly surprised by that. If we look at the history of the 1 series camera versus the 5 series camera, well, the 1 series camera always had whatever the 5 series had and made it just a little bit better. Now, since the R5 came out with that 45 megapixels, you obviously can't do 8K in the R1, but it should be able to produce a really good 6K. So, Mr. Drummond, I understand your pain. And Mr. Drummond isn't the only one to provide some really great feedback that we could see in the Canon EOS R1 and the R5 Mark II next major firmware update that Canon Rumors is talking about that should happen sometime in or around CP+. What I really appreciate for you tuning in is providing your feedback, because this isn't just for me to get clicks. Canon does follow this channel. They do watch my videos. And if the right people are watching, right here, this video is completely about what we would like to see in a firmware update and why. And I think if they just took 5 things from this video, it would be a huge update. So to fix the dynamic range, having that higher noise level in the R5 Mark II when the R1, which I'm shooting with right now, doesn't have it, doesn't make any sense. This has got a stacked sensor it's a backside illuminated sensor. We should have better noise, sorry, not better noise, better performance at high ISO. There should be less noise than the Mark I, not more noise. So architecturally, I don't know what is in the camera that's preventing this from happening. I don't know if it's some sort of software issue or hardware issue. But taking that circuitry from the top of the photo sight and putting it to the bottom, that every single time results in capturing more photons, meaning better low light performance. But for some reason, not in this case. And to add OpenGate, 4K fine, 60 frames per second. And of course, assignable buttons. I don't use the rate button. Why can't I assign that to do something that I want it to do? And pre-capture, it's an incredible capability. I love it. I didn't understand why people were harping on it so much until I actually went out and shooted with it the first time, and I was like, wow. Wow. There was one shot where I was trying to capture a robin, and I was kind of daydreaming. It took off, and immediately out of muscle memory or flinching, I pressed the shutter button. I thought, oh, I missed it. I get back, and guess what? I got a couple of shots. It was truly amazing. But to be able to adjust it, that's a big deal. To be able to set the rate button so that way we turn it on or off, that too is a big button, is a big update. What I would like you to do to help me out here and to help us all out, help yourself, is give us your feedback after using the R5 Mark II and the R1 and telling us, hey, this is what I would like to see. Not telling us, telling Canon what you would like to see in a firmware update. Now, we may not get this for the next major update, but with the R5 Mark I, we saw, what, 16, 12, 13, somewhere over 10, over 12 firmware updates to improve the capabilities. Now, the R5 Mark II is certainly, how shall we say, more fully baked than the R1 was when it came out. The Mark II is almost perfect. So to add some of these other capabilities to it, I think would be a big deal. And it doesn't take away from the potential of the R5 Mark III. I mean, the R5 Mark III could and should provide us with dual CF Express Type B card slots. There's no reason not to do it. There's so many issues that get in the way with using both card slots. Video, for example, I've set it so it records video to just one card, but then the problem is I lose my backup, and there are times where I absolutely need that backup. So I have it to record both video and stills to both card slots, unless I want to switch to 120, and then guess what I have to do? back into the menus and say, okay, don't record to both card slots. It's annoying. It's frustrating. And yes, I have custom modes, but they're all used up. Canon, I think this is a terrific camera, what you've done with it, but assignable buttons and assigning more functions to those buttons, and to be able to change all the buttons is a great deal. And because some of us, myself included, are idiots at times, the ability to reset a given button back to its factory function should be there. Not all of them, just the particular button. That would be great. Thank you everyone for watching. One request I do have, besides commenting down below on what you would like to see in the R1 and the R5 Mark II, is if you're looking at buying any camera gear from Adorama, B&H, or Amazon.com, then please use my affiliate links down below, because I'll be quite honest with you, they literally help keep this channel on the air. They keep the lights on, because I get a small commission back from either of those retailers, anywhere from 2 to 5%. And it's greatly appreciated. The income from YouTube alone is, well, appreciated, but it's not enough to turn this into a real business, which I have. And I do know that within 3 to 6 years, I'm going to be retiring. Not from this channel. I love this too much. When I pick up the camera, I get a sense of excitement, because I'm going to be able to go out there and capture life as I see it, and then edit that as I see it, and have a memory. So as my memory, this old guy here, as his memory starts to fail, he's able to go and look back on times past. So as I plan to go to Vancouver, previous shots that I have of English Bay or Grouse Mountain or anywhere else in Vancouver, I can look back on those videos and say, yeah, in 3 to 6 years, I will be living there. And it refreshes my memory, because even if I try to think of it now, I recall details. But not in the grand detail that this provides, 8K over sample 4K, and what they call 4K fine, 30 frames per second. I do love cameras. And so, you know, when I think of retiring, I think of retiring from my day job, but not from this channel. And in fact, I would like to expand what I do on this channel to do more in-depth reviews. I promised a video review of the 50mm f1.4 VCM. I've got it scripted. I've got to do another pass of it, and I will get it out, but everything kind of gets in the way. Anyhow, thank you so much for tuning in. Have yourself a great day, a great week, and we'll see you again soon. And if you're Chinese, well, have yourself a Happy New Year. I think it's the Year of the Snake coming up at the end of January. Another reason to celebrate. And if you're in the United States, it's probably a holiday today. We don't get our holiday, I think, until February, and it's called Family Day. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have yourself a great day, great week, and we'll see you again soon.